Hi, what is the point of life? I don't mean what is the meaning of life. That might be something slightly different. What is the purpose of life? What is the reason for your life? What is the reason for you being here? What is the point of life, your life, my life? Why are we doing this? There are many different answers, I suppose, and each answer may be different for different people. But for everyone, I would argue that that part of the answer would involve experience. We're here in this world to experience this world, the good and the bad, for whatever reasons. And the reasons themselves, may be different for each person, but there's definitely, when you are experiencing life, you can't help but to experience things. It's just the nature of this world. You are always experiencing something. You're always going through something. You're always experiencing different things, going from one stage of your life to another stage, from one place to another, from one time to another. You're always going to have different experiences, different places and times and spaces and thoughts and ideas. So this idea of experience, my thought process when I was thinking through this yesterday was just playing with the word, playing some word games, I suppose, breaking it up a bit. We have X, which is kind of like exit, external, these sort of things. It's something outside, on the outside. And then you have peer, or peery, or peering, which is peering is kind of like getting together and doing something, and peer is kind of like viewing something. You're looking at something, you're peering into the void, you're peering into the abyss, you're peering into a lovely, beautiful world, or you're peering into an ugly hell world, or you're peering into something that's a bit of a mix. That peer is kind of like, can have multiple meanings, I suppose, but you're sort of like, it's kind of like you're having a little bit of a view into something, but you're not having a broad view. To peer is just to kind of like, almost like peek, I suppose. You're kind of having a small, limited view of something. You're peering. That's my interpretation anyway, just off the top of my head of that word. And then ence is kind of like sense, and any kind of sense is to like have a sense, to feel something, to embody something, to feel it, to know it, to see it, so experience is kind of like the way I was thinking about it or felt about it yesterday when I was going through this was, what if this involves kind of like what people would call the higher self and our self, and you would have some kind of like communication or some sort of like, let's just say the higher self is like the you that's outside of this world, that existed before you were born and exists after you die, and then the you here is just the you in the body that is limited to the body, and so the you here started when you were born and ends when you pass away. But those two are kind of like integrated together in some kind of way, or connected together, and it's like you and you, but it's like the you that is here in the body is kind of the ego self, or so they say. It's the one that's thinking with the brain and having these kind of human thoughts. But then the higher self is the one that's a little bit more, it's not limited by language. It thinks more in symbols. It's more like what you would think of yourself as in a dream. Who is the experiencer in the dream? who is that one that's not really thinking so much, but is present. That is kind of like what I interpret to be a little bit more like the higher self kind of self. So in this world, if you're experiencing things, it's like the higher self is putting itself into this world, and it is picking a point of view, and it's just having a little look, a little peer into it, and having a sense of what's going on. It's having that experience. And X is kind of like the external. It's almost like the higher self is almost like the inside of us. Let's say, just imagine it is the very like middle of your heart or something. Like it is something non-physical. Imagine a world without any physicality, no time, no space. There's just this self. But then you want to see things a bit better, so you go to the outside to experience. That's my kind of understanding. So it's like the higher self is peering into this substance, this thing that exists, this kind of like material world that's like out there. And so the higher self is like looking through its boundaries into the external part of itself, which is the physical world. And so imagine that you have a balloon, and that balloon is full of air, and imagine that you are on one side of that balloon. Let's say you are on the inside of that balloon. So the whole balloon is full of, in a physical world it would be full of air, but in this example there's actually no things on the inside, no physical things, but it's a big balloon. And so when you press against the edge of that balloon, imagine from a physical perspective, because it's an analogy, if you put your finger against a balloon, you press it, it has like a little bit of an impact. It makes like a little bit of a well into where you press that part of the balloon. So instead of pressing into the balloon, it's like the higher self is pressing out of the balloon, but it's not going outside. It's just kind of like pressing that outer layer, and it's kind of like peering through that outer layer of the balloon, kind of like that outer shell, kind of like looking outside from there. But it's not actually being outside. The higher self is kind of still inside that balloon, but it's kind of like looking through that kind of transparent hole, that kind of like shell of what the this is not a great analogy, but it's the way I've kind of been thinking of it is like if you have a balloon and you press into it, it makes that little like you're not pressing the whole balloon completely, you're just making a small little indentation. It makes an indentation. But then imagine that the higher self does many of these indentations, and so instead of becoming like a smooth round balloon, it becomes like a spiky kind of balloon with all these like little indentations in it across the surface. The way I sort of imagine it is that each indentation kind of connects to a body, a person, an ego, a self in the physical world. So you've kind of got like this external like physical world out here, and each of us, we see ourselves as separate and disconnected and different physical bodies, because in the physical world everything looks like it's all either touching each other or not touching each other, or something's over there, something's here, something's far away, something's close. We have these ideas of space, and then we also have similar ideas of time. Something's far in the future, close in the future, it's right now with us, or it's back in the past, or it's far in the past. But how can I say this? So backtracking a little bit to the balloon again, that kind of imprints, that mark that's coming through the balloon, it kind of connects to that human body, that person, that, or even an animal or whatever, that thing that's experiencing consciousness, that form that is having an experience in this world. And so anything that's alive, I suppose you could say, and it's hard to define exactly what's alive and what's not, but anything that is alive could be connected, could be something that's having an experience, but it's ultimately coming through in different forms. It's like different indentations coming through the outside of that balloon. But internally, and I think you might get where I'm going here, internally, that inside is one giant undefined size of consciousness. And it's kind of like it's in a way, it's all one, and yet at the same time it's separate. So each person here has like their own separate body, their own separate life, their own separate set of experiences. And yet, somehow, each of us is kind of like, on the inside, part of this kind of non-physical, non-material thing that is difficult to define, doesn't have any real particular size and form, and it's kind of like connected. Everything on the inside is kind of connected in a way, and it's hard to say that this is separate from that and this is separate from that. And so where I was thinking yesterday was that if you have two people that are in a different mindset, doing completely different things, then in the physical world they are sort of like they're disconnected, they're in different places or different times, having totally different experiences. And from the higher self's perspective, it's kind of like it's a different layer, or it's a different part of the higher self. It's a different part of that undefined consciousness that connects everything. It's almost like it's an over there, yeah, I can't really use physical terms to describe it, but it's as if those other people in other times that are having totally different experiences to us, we're still connected to them ultimately, but they're so far away from us that we don't see them and we don't interact with them. They're on the other side of the balloon. And so we're all here, all the ones that we can communicate and talk to here, we're all on this like little, this balloon is like the size of a universe or something, like it's huge. And so we're all like clustered on this one little tiny bit of the balloon, and we're all making little indentations here. And we can see each other here at this point in time and communicate with each other. And we think we're all separate, but if we come close enough, not necessarily physically, but that can help. If we come close enough in one way or another, if our indentations get really close together, then it could be in physical space, it could be in physical time, it could be in the way that we think. We think in the same way. We start having our minds kind of like communicate together, or almost like thinking in the same sort of pattern. When we come close in one of those ways, or in all of those ways, now we start to sort of like find ourselves with those indentations very close to each other, and we start to see that like we start to find little glitches where our higher self at that point is literally the next door over, the same part of that higher self. So if you're having a really good day and then you are in a really good mood and then you find someone that's also just happens to be next door and you bump into them, you could be like sharing something, or even though you're having different lives, different experiences, on the inside you could be sharing something together. So whether that's a feeling in your heart, you both feel the same way about something, or whether it's like a feeling, an emotion, if you have the same emotion together. If one person yawns and then the other person, without even knowing that they've yawned, starts yawning as well. If one person thinks something and then another person almost like hears their thoughts because they're so close to them in that indentation in the balloon. This balloon analogy is not really fantastic, but it's the best I can do. If you find yourself so close to another part of your higher self, you could experience essentially two different lives together, and yet feeling like you are kind of one together. So this is just a theory. I don't really have a great way of explaining it, so this is the best way that I can explain it. And I don't think we can define certain things ultimately, definitely not in the human world, using human understandings that we have now in this 21st century. But I'll do the best I can with the language that I have and the things that I can think of. But yeah, things like telepathy, which is rare but could occur, could happen when you happen to bump into someone. You happen to bump into someone, not necessarily physically bump into them, but you happen to sort of be on their wavelength for a certain point of time, and at that point your subconscious sort of connects to that part of the balloon, that part of the higher self that other person is also connecting to. And so you sort of like linked just for a brief moment in time, and you kind of like have a thought and they have that same thought as well. And then it becomes hard to sort of define like who had the thought first and whose thought is it? Is it really is it really one person's thought or another, or is it kind of like something that's come from the higher self? You know, the other day I was living my life and I was doing some work, and then everything was just very material and very normal. Everything was plain as day. And then I had a shower, and then I had dinner, and then I was just walking around in the house, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, I was thinking about something, and then I stopped thinking about something for a few seconds. Out of nowhere, my brain just had the thought, telepathy. Like out of nowhere, that word just popped into my mind, telepathy. And it had no context, no relation at all to anything at all I'd thought or done, experienced that day. Just out of nowhere, my brain just suddenly thought, telepathy. And it's not like I heard the word, it's not like someone said the word out loud, it's not like I heard the word verbalized in my head. It's just that word just came in, popped in as a thought, just a single word, telepathy. That word just suddenly appeared. Like, why did that appear? Where did that come from? My subconscious may have just thought now's a good time to raise that word, but maybe that word came from my higher self that kind of like poked it in there to say, hey, here's now the time for you to experience this and to start going down this path. And I wonder, on sort of similar lines, if one person has a set of experiences in this world and they kind of go, okay, this has all been bad or good or whatever, but now it's time for a change. Like now I'm starting to think about things in a slightly different way. Now that I've had these experiences, I'm starting to like shift my line of thinking, and you start to get a different kind of line of thinking that you had before. And what I'm sort of finding is that when someone has that kind of shift in their way of thinking, it kind of it's not just limited to them, to that one person. It will tend to happen all across the world, not necessarily at the exact same time, but close in time, and kind of close in space. You kind of have other people, and not everyone, but other people will kind of start to also shift their focus because they've also been having similar experiences. And so you kind of get like this 100th monkey kind of idea where one person has the thought, but other people have the same thought at the same time, or other people have the same idea at the same time. They all kind of like shift together. And so I wonder if this is kind of like a kind of a form of telepathy almost, where each person has their own life, and they are all individual and separate, and yet at the same time they're all kind of like connected through this higher consciousness, where the higher consciousness is kind of like all one, but there's different parts of the higher consciousness. But if you happen to be connected to like part A, just for lack of better language, if you happen to be connected to part A of higher consciousness, and someone in Africa is connected to part A, and then someone in Canada is connected to part A, and someone in Korea is connected to part A, and then you all have these kind of similar experiences at the same time. When that part A starts shifting, all those people may also start shifting together at the same time. The current vibe or trend is that around the world there's a lot of people who are kind of just like letting go of things, and things they've been holding on to tightly, situations that they've kind of been putting themselves in and just holding on to it. People are kind of like just letting go a little bit more now. That's kind of like one of the recent trends that I've been seeing amongst others. When you watch YouTube videos, you get random creators from around the world who will just be like, I'm going to stop doing YouTube videos now, I'm going to do less YouTube videos. Or some people like, I quit my job, or I was a full-time, I watched this brilliant video the other day of some random guy, and he was like, I was a full-time brain surgeon, and then I quit my job, and now I just do nothing, and I feel great. And there's a lot of that kind of trend of people just kind of like letting go of their difficult situations that they've been putting themselves into, essentially, and holding on to. That's just the current theme, and I've been feeling it myself as well. In my own life, I've been sort of like slowly making little changes here and there to kind of like let go of the things that I've been holding on to so tightly and kind of wanting, but ultimately, like, I can't do it forever. And so I've been sort of experiencing that myself as well. And so when I feel that, when I make that change within myself, it's like everyone's also, not everyone, but a whole bunch of people in that same part of the higher self are also going through similar kind of things in their own ways, in their own experiences. So I don't know where to go with this topic. I think maybe I'll just leave it there because I don't want to over talk it and overextend it. But my kind of idea was that how does this process work? What is this thing that we're dealing with? How is it that we are kind of like linked and yet separate? And this balloon analogy, you may think of a better one. And if you have a better one, please let me know. But it's just the one that I was visualizing. And originally I was thinking of pressing into a balloon, because when you press into a balloon, you get that kind of indentation. But because I'm talking about like a higher self sort of thing, it's more like think of